The morning of September 11th, 2001, began without any forewarning of the catastrophe to come. By 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 had been hijacked and was deliberately flown into the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. It was shocking. People thought it might be an accident at first. You might.
I mean, can you imagine seeing a massive plane just crash like that? It must have been surreal for anyone watching. Exactly. But the horror didn't stop there. Just 17 minutes later, at 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 struck the South Tower. This was the moment people realized it was no accident. This was an attack.
2 planes, 2 buildings, in less than 20 minutes. That realization, it had to be chilling.
Absolutely. Both towers collapsed. First the South Tower at 9:59 a.m. and then the North Tower at 10:28 a.m., killing thousands of people and reshaping New York City's skyline forever. And while this was unfolding, there were 2 other hijacked planes in action. American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon at 9:37 a.m., causing a massive blaze and partial collapse of the structure.
And I always find it incredible that amidst all this chaos, the passengers on United Airlines Flight 93 made that heroic decision. They really fought back against the hijackers, didn't they?
They did. The passengers stormed the cockpit, ultimately forcing the plane down into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, at 10:03 a.m. It's widely believed they prevented an even greater tragedy, likely a strike on either the US Capitol or the White House. Their bravery cost them their lives, but saved countless others.
It's just hard to imagine the courage it must have taken to do that, knowing what was happening, and still stepping up like that. Truly heroic.
Meanwhile, the global response was immediate. News channels began broadcasting the attacks live, and the entire world watched in disbelief. It wasn't just an attack on the United States, it felt like an attack on humanity as a whole. Suddenly, the concept of safety, whether on planes, in buildings, or even just existing in familiar spaces, was turned on its head.
And that fear rippled everywhere. I remember people saying it changed everything, how we travelled, how we worked, just everything.
Yes, it was a day that transformed not just the lives of those directly involved, but also how nations approach security, trust, and international relations. The world wouldn't be the same again.
And as we'll see, it wasn't long before al-Qaeda and its leader, Osama bin Laden, became household names.
To delve deeper into how the world changed on that fateful day, we must also understand the forces that orchestrated it. This brings us to al-Qaeda, led by the infamous Osama bin Laden. Bin Laden wasn't merely a lone figure. He represented an ideology that fueled these attacks and aimed to instill fear on a global scale.
Exactly. It feels like his name became synonymous with terrorism overnight. But what was driving him? Why 9/11?
Well, at its core, bin Laden and his group saw themselves waging a war against the United States, primarily because of America's military presence in the Middle East, especially in Saudi Arabia. Add to that US support for Israel, which they viewed as unjust, and years of what they described as aggression against Muslims globally. They wanted to strike what they considered symbols of American power: economic, military, and political.
So it wasn't just about violence for the sake of it. There was a twisted strategy behind all this?
Exactly. And this strategy wasn't dreamed up overnight. The planning for 9/11 began long before the attacks themselves. Al-Qaeda operatives spent years preparing, from recruiting the hijackers to training them to fly commercial planes. Many were chosen not just for their skills, but for their willingness to die for the cause.
Years? Okay, that's unreal. How much detail went into something so devastating? How did they even manage it?
The operatives were highly methodical. They trained in aviation, with several attending flight schools in the United States itself. This wasn't a rushed operation. Every step was calculated, with each hijacker knowing their role in what would become one of the most infamous days in history.
And it wasn't just the hijackers, right? There had to be coordinating minds behind the scenes to pull something this complex off.
Spot on. The mastermind of the operation was Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who worked closely with bin Laden. Together, they turned what began as an idea into a meticulously planned act of terror. They handpicked not just the attackers, but also the targets, the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, and likely the US Capitol or White House as the fourth target.
And that's where Flight 93 comes in, doesn't it? Those passengers, they managed to stop the plan.
They did. And when you think about it, it's eerie how much hinged on just a few individuals. By bringing together this network of operatives with such precision, al-Qaeda managed to outmaneuver global intelligence agencies. Until, tragically, it was far too late.
It's scary, isn't it? Thinking about all the pieces that had to fall into place for this to happen. And yet, understanding their motivations, it kind of forces us to confront bigger questions.
It does, absolutely. It raises critical questions about how geopolitics and foreign policies can sometimes fuel resentment or create conditions where such extreme acts take shape. And it begs us to ask, what can we learn from this? How do we address those underlying tensions to prevent future tragedies?
Reflecting on the motivations and events that led to 9/11, we see a tragic culmination of tensions that reshaped our world. The immediate response was swift and decisive. A coalition of countries led by the United States launched what we now know as the War on Terror. By October 2001, the US had invaded Afghanistan to dismantle al-Qaeda and remove the Taliban, who were providing them shelter. It was a turning point in international relations.
And it wasn't just about military action, was it? Nations around the world introduced new policies, passed tougher laws, and focused on fighting terrorism wherever they could.
Absolutely. In the US, the government passed the USA PATRIOT Act, which expanded surveillance powers significantly. While it was promoted as a tool to protect citizens, many argued that it infringed on privacy and civil liberties. It's one of those decisions that still sparks debate today.
Not to mention how it changed daily life. In airports, for example, security checks became way stricter almost overnight. And let's not forget the rise in anti-Muslim sentiment.
Yes, that was an unfortunate consequence. While people were understandably fearful, this led to a surge in hate crimes and discrimination against Muslim communities and anyone who appeared Middle Eastern. It created divisions and left scars that many are still trying to heal today.
It's heartbreaking, really, because those same communities were mourning alongside everyone else. They lost neighbours, friends and loved ones too.
Indeed. And amidst all this, the need to remember those we lost became crucial. Memorials like the National September 11th Memorial Museum in New York City stand as symbols, not just of grief, but of resilience. They teach future generations about what happened that day and why it matters.
I think places like the memorial are so important for healing. They give us a space to reflect, honour the victims, and remind us of the bravery shown that day.
Exactly. And they also remind us of how far we've come since that dark day in 2001. The world has changed dramatically, often in response to those events. Remembering that helps guide us forward.
It's a legacy of sorrow, but also of strength. Well, that's all we have for today. Thank you for spending time with us as we explored the impact and legacy of September 11th. It's been enlightening.
Indeed, these are stories worth remembering. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.